we the people in order to form a more perfect union, brought to us by the Tampa Bay Area Muslim Association and the Tampa Bay community. I am the Reverend Dr. Russell Meyer, and the Executive Director of the Florida Council of Churches, and it's an honor to be in this interfaith pluralistic space with you all this evening as we begin the first of what will be a series of conversations over the next year or so. We want to begin tonight with a moment of silence. Pinellas County is number 4 in the state of those who have lost their lives to the coronavirus. We're just under 800 souls who have been lost. So we want to take 8 seconds of silence right now to call them to mind and to pray or meditate or reflect on their lives and the challenges before us so that we might do everything we can to end the suffering. O great and merciful mystery from which we all come. You have said through your Holy One at one time, for I know how many are your transgressions and how great are your sins, you who afflict the righteous and take a bribe and push aside the needy in the marketplace. Seek good and not evil, that you may live. Hate evil and love good. Establish justice in the marketplace, so that I may be gracious unto you. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Would you pray with me? Let not one of us off the hook for this moment now. Let us all find a way to be engaged in becoming that more perfect union which ends suffering, which establishes justice, and which seeks the well-being of us all. In your precious name, however we name it, we ask these things, and may it be so.
Good evening and welcome to you all. I want to start by thanking the impressive panelists speaking here today. Thank you for your time, and thank you for taking on such wide-ranging issues facing our city, our state, our nation. I know all attending are looking forward to hearing from each of you, so I won't be long in my remarks. My thanks as well to Benjamin Smet and everyone at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. I appreciate you facilitating this event and hosting us today. And finally, one more thank you to my friends at the Tampa Bay Area Muslim Association. We appreciate your sponsorship. One of my favorite events that we have here in St. Pete is our annual iftar dinner that we co-host with the Tampa Bay Area Muslim Association. And I am so sorry we couldn't have it earlier this year. But it's firmly a tradition in St. Pete now, and I am confident we'll have it again for years to come. That wonderful dinner, like so many other events, fell victim to COVID-19, which I am sure will be discussed at least in some part today. After all, this virus has divided us in ways big and small, literally and figuratively. I know there is much more on the agenda today, and no doubt you will be spending a good deal of time discussing issues of policing, public safety, and what that means for people of privilege as well as those who have been traditionally disenfranchised. As you probably saw, we had protesters on both sides of the political spectrum in town this weekend. And I want to point out that we had no arrests and no violence. I give a great deal of credit to our police department, who did excellent work in de-escalating a tense situation. And as always, I am grateful to those who demonstrate peacefully. I'm not here to brag about our police department, though I am proud of the work they do and believe they should serve as a model for police departments around the nation. I think we can all agree that there are some police operations that could learn a whole lot from our department. I also believe one of the most important reasons our police department is second to none is because of the leadership of Chief Anthony Holloway. One of the best decisions I made as mayor. Chief is a uniter. He understands the importance of dialogue as a tool. He understands the importance of respect in dialogue. St. Pete is on the right track, but hard work remains each and every day to fully attain our vision. Conversations like this help us get there. So thank you all for listening, and without further ado, I'd like to ask Chief Holloway to take over. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. From the men and women of the St. Petersburgh Police Department, I would like to say welcome to our home. We came into our new home on March 22nd of 2019. This great building that you're in is 168,000 square feet. This building can withstand 195 miles an hour wind, which is a category 5. We hope we never have to find out if that's true. It also housed our emergency operations center. It housed our data center for the police department and the city. And it also is the backup to the emergency operations for Pinellas County. The building cost $78.5 million, and most of it was paid out of pennies for Pinellas. This police department is very happy that you're here today because of the very great conversation that we're about to have. And that conversation is for us to learn. Because the only way that we can work together as one in a community is to learn from one another. Now I'll leave you this quote from Dr. King. People don't get along because they fear each other. People fear each other because they don't know each other. People don't know each other because they're not properly to communicate with each other. So tonight, I hope that we can communicate with each other, learn from each other, so we can make our community much better than what it is today. So with that, I'm going to leave you with a great moderator, Ms. Janine Feesler. Ms. Janine.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mayor Kresman and Chief Holloway, for so warmly welcoming us to the new police station and this wonderful evening. And as any of you have turned on the radio, television, our social media streams these days, you can't help but notice the headlines. We've got COVID deaths, business closing, wildfires, hurricanes and flooding, marches and demonstrations, Black Lives Matter, political divisiveness, Supreme Court challenge, and the list goes on. Today's media and culture tends to focus on what divides us, highlighting our differences, and sharing stories about the things that are pulling us apart, not together. That's a lot of focus and attention on the negative. So here in St. Petersburg, we aspire to be a city of compassion and a city of peace. So instead, we want to shift the mindset away from choosing a side to listening and understanding the core needs at the center of each and different perspective. Finding common ground in a polarized world takes humanity, and again, a lot of listening. Only when all voices and perceptions can be shared, heard, and understood can we effectively move towards consensus and find a way forward together. We the people intend to become a series of conversations about issues important to our community so we can learn about all sides of the topics, ask questions, and most importantly, share ideas for solutions together. Together we can address the changes we'd like to see, starting right here in St. Pete. So tonight, in this first live stream event, how can we reclaim our inalienable rights and embrace our common humanity when so much divides us? That is the question for this evening. So to help us explore this topic, we have assembled an amazing panel of diverse citizen leaders, people doing their best to leverage their talents to give back to the community and make a difference. So let me introduce them. I am going to start with Dr. KATURA-JENKINS Hall. Born and raised in St. Petersburg, Dr. Jenkins Hall's PhD in clinical and community psychology led her to a 30-year career as a professor of psychology at USF Tampa. She currently serves as board chair of the Foundation for a Healthy St. Petersburg, where she pursues the issues of race and health equity while continuing examining the role of gender and income bias within institutions and organizations for the improved health of Pinellas County. She also serves as the Associate Pastor of New Dawn Restoration Center in Tampa, is CEO of the Greater Reach Alliance for Counselors and Educators, GRACE, where she provides education, training, and counseling services to communities, and is founder of Legacy 56, a St. Petersburg nonprofit that seeks to remember, reclaim, and restore the richness of the African American spirit and culture. Welcome, Dr. KATURA-JENKINS.
Thank you, Jenny.
My pleasure. Next is Imam YAHYA Abdullah. He is a Muslim leader and Imam of the Masjid Muhammad in Jacksonville, Florida. He is an author of 4 books, an international speaker, diversity champion, documentarian, and has received numerous awards for his dedication to community service, including from Presidents Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. He founded African American Men Against Narcotics, a group dedicated to drug prevention and rehabilitation, and has been featured in a nationally acclaimed P.M.EST documentary entitled The War on Drugs. As a spiritual leader, Imam Abdullah has organized conferences on diversity, global trends in the 21st century, and numerous interfaith dialogues. He also hosts a Friday prayer lecture via Facebook Live on the Al-Islam Worldwide Ministries YouTube channel, where I'm sure you can also see tonight's panel discussion. Welcome, Imam Abdullah.
Thank you very much, Jay.
My pleasure. Frederick Allen F.R. Johnson is an acclaimed, and I do mean acclaimed, jazz vocalist, author, painter, spiritual elder, and arts educator. The fact that Fred Johnson has opened for both Aretha Franklin and Dr. Deepak Chopra certainly points to his versatility as an artist. He currently serves as the Community Engagement Specialist and Director of the Arts Legacy and Arts and Healing Initiatives at the David A. Strass Jr. Center for the Performing Arts in Tampa. He is also serving as Interim Executive Director of the St. Petersburg International Folk Festival. Recognized globally for his work in the health and wellness community, Fred presents lectures and seminars all over the world about the healing power of music and accentuating the importance of creative expression as a catalyst for personal and community empowerment, health, and healing, and giving voice to the voiceless. Welcome, Fred Johnson. The Reverend Dr. Russell Meyer is Executive Director of the Florida Council of Churches, pastor of the Lutheran Urban Parish of Tampa, and heads up the Florida Faith Advocacy Office. Dr. Meyer convenes the Florida Interfaith Climate Actions Network and serves as community co-chair of the Suncoast Sea Level Rise Collaborative at St. Petersburg College with the Institute of Strategic Policy Solutions. He is a founder of the Real Talk Coalition for Education Equity, is active with frontline community organizers, providing leadership for some of the largest marches in the Bay Area, and is an anti-racism consult with Black Lives Matter Tampa. His doctoral work is applying social field theory to generate conversation among heterogeneous groups that leads to new collaborative action, much like today. So welcome all of you so much for being here. And I guess the biggest question of all, as we move into our new normal of divisiveness and polarization and frustration, quite frankly, with all of us, is how did we get here? How did we find ourselves in such a state? I'm sure COVID plays a large role in where we find ourselves today, but I think we were on a roll before that hit. So I know we've talked a little bit amongst ourselves, so I'm going to actually start for some perspective on history.
Thank you, Jenny. First of all, it's such an honor and a pleasure to be with you all, to be with friends I've known and new friends I've made, and friendships that are going to strengthen over time. We are in the process of creating an economy based on relationships rather than on extraction and exploitation. And it just feels good to do that. I also want to thank you for naming the 4 pandemics. The coronavirus has shown us that we're really suffering 4 pandemics. Pandemic is something that affects everybody in the world. So the coronavirus is doing that. The systemic racism that rises out of American history is global too. And everybody in the world is affected by that. The ash falling on New York City is the birds and the bees and the bears and the trees of the California forests. And that's the climate. It's a global thing. Glaciers are melting everywhere. And around the world are authoritarians rising up and saying, I'll save you, just do what I say. And so these are pandemics that threaten the more perfect union that we look forward to. So where does that phrase come from? A more perfect union. When the framers of the Constitution were speaking about that, they had 2 things in mind. One was the confederacy of states that they first tried to create, and they realized they couldn't hang things together just by saying, y'all sort of do what works for you. They couldn't resist the British by just simply having a collection of states together. But the other thing that they had in mind was the Union Jack, was the union around King George. And they knew they didn't want a monarch. So the more perfect union they were thinking about was, how could we Anglo-Saxon property owners create a better government than the one we had known? So they created white America. Now, how did they defend? How do you defend a new country? And they, at that time, had militia, local militia. And every able-bodied white person, clergy or whomever else, had to own a gun and be part of the local militia. And that local militia existed for one of 2 reasons. To either subjugate the natives or to traffic in Africans. You know, to catch runaway slaves. But let's call it what it was. It was trafficking in human persons. Where we have found ourselves today is this narrative of having militia protect white property owners no longer functions in the world today. The more perfect union we're looking at is a union based upon the plurality of the peoples of our nation. And the time in which a minority, and most of the American history, white male property owners have been a minority as a population. The day of a minority actually being the substance of our government is breaking apart. And there's a lot of anxiety about that. Scripture talks about the birth pangs of a new reality coming into being. Something is about to be born. What is that something? Will it be a more healthy nation in which we learn to respect one another, cherish one another's heritage, learn from one another's wisdom? Or will we continue to be a people who subject ourselves to minority rule? I look forward to a more perfect union that understands that our militia, the group that defends us, law enforcement, police, is not about protecting the white agenda and white property, but is about making certain that any person can walk on any street at any time of the day and feel safe and welcome.
We at St. Pete, we have quite a history of being a welcoming place and a tourist destination and a place where the sun shines on all equally. But we don't necessarily have a history of that for all people equally. And someone that can perhaps shed a little light on that, having some history with Legacy 56, is Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Jenny. I, first of all, want to say how honored I am to be among such distinguished panelists and to share my point of view as a Black female, a mother who was born and raised in St. Petersburg, in pretty segregated community, grew up, and understand a perspective, I believe, that may be a little bit different than you might hear from others here. I personally am concerned about what I will bequeath to my grandchildren. I know what I inherited, and I'm concerned about what I will bequeath to others. I want to begin by just reading this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So our founding fathers who penned these words did not fully grasp this idea of all men. All that three-letter word makes a difference in understanding how we got here. In 2019, just last year, I was privileged to take a trip to Ghana with about 30 other people, Black people from the diaspora, to the year of the Great Return. And part of what we experienced while there was what they have come to know as slave castles. And in those slave castles is where African people were taken by force. Some call it the Great Kidnapping, some call it the African Holocaust. This is a disastrous way to treat another human being. And I'm sharing this with you because as we're in those slave castles where slaves were gathered, those people who would be enslaved in America, in the Americas were gathered, we exited through a door called the door of no return. And that door of no return led to the beach where they would be taken in little boats to big ships on their way to somewhere that they had no idea. It was indeed a great kidnapping. They were packed in like sardines, or you could say they were packed in like cattle. They, somewhere between Africa and America, these human beings, with their own way of understanding God, with their own socialization, with their own way of raising their families, with their own languages. Somewhere along the way, between Africa to America, they were dehumanized. They became property. They entered America as property. So all was not all. I want to speak more, but I want to honor the time. All was not for everyone. And that's how it starts. Because as Reverend Myers says, it's not just an American thing with white supremacy domination, but we felt it greatly. And so what happened at the signing of the Constitution some 170 years later, 1619 is the marker. What happened there, we still see residuals 400 years later. And so what we're seeing didn't just start.
Absolutely. It kind of reminds me of, you know, the Princess and the Pea, you know, with all of the math, you have this initial challenge or these initial fears and ways of conducting ourselves, or these initial problems and wrongs. And then year after year, generation after generation, they think they're making changes, but nothing has done anything to address the core issue. And so it keeps exaggerating itself, and it keeps growing, and it doesn't solve the real problem. It just bends it a little bit, but not enough. So what's curious to me is we do have such a rich history of challenges, of wrongs, of laws and processes and patterns that have maintained or tried to maintain something that might not have been the best solution in the first place, but here we are. And now we're getting to the point where, wow, we've maybe got a chance to stop. You know, COVID has gotten us off our gerbil wheel for a second, and in our solitude and in our quiet, and even in the time we've saved not having to commute back and forth, all of a sudden we get to think differently and think maybe what do we want to bring forward from the past that we don't have to? How can we look at it differently? So Imam Abdullah, from the Muslim perspective and from your spiritual side, what is your take on the history of things that has gotten us to this point?
Thank you very much, Jenny. First, let me say, God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer, and peace be with you. And assalamu alaikum to our viewing audience. Shalom to our Jewish viewers also. And I want to thank Imam Abdulaziz, for inviting me, Kareem, Ali, and Akil. I'm honored to be a part of this, the Tampa Bay Area Muslim Association. And when I first saw the title, when they asked me would I participate in this, I said, well, I'm really not traveling much during this COVID-19. But I saw the title, We the People. And I wanted to be a part of that, so I'm honored to be here. Now, to your question, and I like what Dr. Myers was saying and Dr. KATURA. What we're dealing with are symptoms of some underlying root causes. So all of this stuff, with the exception of COVID-19, talking about the social issues and all of the systemic structural racism and those issues, they have their beginning somewhere. And I could go back to ancient times to talk about it, but we're dealing with what's happening in America. So what I want to read something here. And this is hopefully an effort to try to uproot the cause, because we have to ask the question, what empowers certain individuals to think they have a divine right to be over someone and have a superior attitude and be supreme over others? Well, let me just read something. And this is from the founder, the designer of the Confederate flag, William T. Thompson. So I'm going to quote him and make a comment reading. He says, quote, as a people, and he's talking about white Americans, we are fighting to maintain the heaven-ordained supremacy of the white man over the inferior or colored race. Now, where did he get this idea? That you have some heaven-ordained right to be over what he called the Negro race. So let me continue. He says, as a national emblem, the Confederate flag, is significant of our high cause, the cause of a superior race. Now in the Quran, God says to us in the Quran, chapter 17, verse 7, لَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. surely we have created all of the children of Adam. All of us are the children of Adam. But the misperception, and I'm sure Dr. Meyer, he could appreciate this, being in the Lutheran Church, and I'm speaking historically now, the Council of and Constantine and the Council of Nicaea. So this idea that was created, that William Thompson picked up in the United States, that you have a heavenly ordained right as whites to dominate and be over African American people, or people what they call other ethnic groups. I don't like the term people of color because all of us are people of color. However, where does the idea stem from? I'm going to be very, very sensitive to this. I mean, no disrespect. It comes from the presentation and the representation. This is the root cause of it in America and much of the Western world. I visited China, I saw it there. I visited Hong Kong, I saw it there. Many of the islands in the Caribbean and the Latin American countries. When you put up an image of a group of people, a representation of God, and say that this is God and we have been created in the image of God, i.e. the European American representation of God, and the sun looking like that, well, people like William Thompson said, we have an ordained heavenly right because God looks like us. God's son looks like us, so therefore we must be the children of God and everybody else is under us.
Wow. So we have a lot of legs to stand on. You know, we've got the Doctrine of Discovery with Spaniards coming to a new land was a similar document where they would plant the flag and say, this land is ours and everything here is ours and we claim it in the name of the Holy Father, amen. And what does that do to the indigenous? What does that do to the other people here? So there's a ripple effect, that trickling, that covering over of taking old ideas and bending them a little bit and making them our own and continuing the historic pain of perhaps a mistake. In any case, from a artistic and cultural and creative standpoint, do you see any reflections of how we got here?
I mean, I think the reflection is that, you know, everyone has spoken about it, but there's been a dehumanization of people. You know, the journey through that door of no return is the legacy of all people of color that exist in this country. I think one of the reasons why it continues to perpetuate is because we can't see the fullness of each other. You know, I was having a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I probably said this 4 or 5 times in the last couple of months, but the reality of my descendants, the reality of those who, the strongest of those who made the journey from Africa, because many died along the way, and many chose to not take that journey, to go over the side, rather than to go to this place of unknownness, if that's a word. But the reality that exists is that I would say from the age of 5, there has never been a day in my life where I didn't first and foremost recognize, as my father said to me, you're gonna have to make it in spite of the challenges that you face. And the pain and the challenges in my life and in the life of all Black folk who are the descendants of slaves are real. It feels to me that one of the changes now, or one of the possibilities that exist now, is that COVID-19 created an opportunity, if but for a short period of time now, for all of humanity to stop and say, wait, this could happen to me. Wait, I could lose my breath. Wait, I could die. The whole world is challenged by this one thing. And so it slowed us down for a moment. It gave each of us the opportunity, if but for a moment, to recognize our vulnerability as an individual. individual
And as a human being.
and as a human being, right? Some folks, I had one colleague of mine said that COVID-19 slowed us down enough and moved us away from our workaday challenges and moved us into our homes and moved us into a place of stillness just enough so that 8 minutes and 46 seconds that we watched George Floyd's life be taken touched people that didn't take the time in a different way. It's important for us to recognize that this is not just a systemic structure, but it is a reality that human beings have been dehumanized. And over the years, there have been advances, systemic advances, that just sort of allowed the scourge of discrimination and injustice to find some sort of a false balance. But the balance has never really been there, because children have to deal with the reality that because of the color of my skin, I'm gonna have to go up against, and that's an everyday thing. So how do we, so from a creative standpoint of view, you know, it's like the difference between, you know, that's why music is so powerful, right? Because music transcends the mind. And music, you know, the old philosophy that the longest distance traveled is the distance between the head and the heart. Most of our exchanges in our life every day are head conversations. They're not heart conversations, right? So there's one thing of saying, you know, there's one thing if I say to you, listen, you know, my ancestors died because of slavery. And if I say to you, listen, my ancestors died, it's a different thing because it transcends the mind and it moves into the heart. So the challenge that we face and the opportunity that we're given is to move into a heart space. And those people who only from the mind understand those realities of the hurt and the damage of injustice and Jim Crow and discrimination need to hear and feel a reality that another human being has to deal with that deep inside every day of their life. It's not a philosophical journey we're taking together. It's a real journey, and hurt is real. And hurt doesn't go away. We manage it, some of us. Some of us don't, right, doctor? Some of us don't manage it. Some of us can't manage it. Some of us can't take it. Some of us can only take so much. The balance is only when we can see and feel each other as whole human beings. This is the opportunity that we're given. The greatest gift that our Creator has given us is the capacity to create. We get to choose what is it that we choose to create. And do we choose to see another? Great quote from the great Mohandas Gandhi, and how whatever your perspective on the Creator of God is, he said, he who cannot see God in the eyes of the next person that he meet need look no further. If I can't see and feel your humanity, then I can't think it into reality. I have to be willing to take that shared breath that we all take in an effort to manifest change based upon the fact that I honor, see, and know that as I see you, so I see myself. If the heart doesn't change, you can change systems all day long. But it has to be a balance. The pendulum has to swing back towards that distance between the head and the heart and find a balanced place. And we can only do that by seeing and acknowledging each other. And it's not about blame, it's about truth. It's truth and understanding, but really knowing truth and being willing to accept truth for what it is and see another human being as a whole being.
Wow, what an opportunity we have to finally live into this ironic concept of the United States as a melting pot, as a blend of so many different nationalities and traditions and histories and humanities that, you know, we've talked a good game, but we haven't really connected. So my challenge and my next question is, Okay, we know how we got here. We know that there are already policies and laws and structures and cultural norms, for lack of a better word, that are in place that keep us from seeing or experiencing each other. And you even look at the algorithms now on Facebook and other social media that keeps showing us more of what we clicked on once, to the exclusion of so many other things, that it's perpetuating this isolation of a myopic view of things, instead of truly being able to see what's not inside our homes or inside our immediate 5-mile radius of home. So what do we look at now as a culture? What do we change now to get from where we are and take this breath and reconnect with our hearts and make some changes? What do we do?
May I begin? I want to just examine a bit of the old way that we have viewed America, and our goal for America has been as a melting pot. Some people don't melt. We're going to stand out. And so we changed that view to something like a tossed salad, where everything has its distinctive flavor, but lettuce alone can't work. I need something else in my salad, right? Or a beautiful prism where every color is appreciated. So we want to acknowledge that part of the solution, Jenny, is that we acknowledge that our differences are not deficient. We are not going to melt. We're not going to blend in. We're not trying to do all of that. We are simply trying to appreciate each other. We're trying to hear from each other. I really felt you, Fred. I really felt what you were saying, and particularly when you put it to music, I did feel that. And so we have to be able to examine ourselves as human beings, not just what we think, but what we feel in our hearts. We must respect what we believe and our differences in how we believe. And we must agree on the actions that are humanizing. So these humanizing actions should be a point of commonality, that we all can say, yes, I want to be about peace. I think in our scripture, in the Bible, it talks about us being one body, and each part of the body is equally important. The hand won't say to the foot, I don't need you. And so we just want to read this. It's a part of scripture. It says, if one part of our body is honored, the whole body is happy. If one part of the body suffers, then the other parts will suffer with it. If one part is praised, all the other parts share its happiness. And I'll stop there. Part of what coronavirus did, it allowed us to stop long enough to observe somebody else's suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And can I?
Absolutely. I see the book open. I was like, you're percolating.
Yes. I want to add to this from the Quran. She mentioned scripture, I'm a man of scripture. So I want to read from the Quran what my brother Fred was saying, and this scripture came to my mind from the Quran, chapter 49, verse 13. It says here, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَىٰ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِندَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلِيمٌ خَبِيرٌ. All mankind, all of humanity, verily we created all of you from the single pairing of a male and a female. So this verse starts with God revealing to Muhammad the prophet, praise be upon him, our sameness, our unique origin. All of us originate from a male and a female. And here's the interesting thing, Jenny, about this origination. When that fluid is emitted from the male, it's not black, brown, yellow, it's liquid. And the liquid looks the same for each one of us. It is creation and nature that colors us, and all of us have color. That's why I don't like this term, people of color. It's like, well, who are the other people? Yeah, which color you talking about? Everybody has color. Nature colors us. And J.A. Rogers, one of the great historians, wrote a book titled "Nature Knows No Color Line." So if you're just identifying yourselves by colors, well, I'm black. Well, so is the eggplant. The eggplant is black. So you're bragging about nothing more than an eggplant. That's all you have to brag about. Cauliflower is white. So you identify yourself as white, you identify with the cauliflower. Cauliflower is not bragging about it being white. So these crazy ideas of kindergarten mentality, God says we're created from a pairing of a male and a female. And oh, by the way, when a child is born, I was in China, traveling to China, been to Africa, traveling. There is no Chinese way to cry. A baby doesn't cry in Mandarin. A baby doesn't cry in Cantonese. A baby doesn't cry in Kiswahili. Baby doesn't cry in English or Arabic or Spanish or Polish. A baby cries in universal language, baby language. Smiling is universal. All of us are smiling. There's no black way to smile, quote unquote, black way to smile, or white way to smile. This is nature. Nature organizes us, and nature shows us we're all the same where it essentially matters. Now, let me finish reading this verse right quick. We created all mankind from the single pairing of a male and a female, then made you into different nations, and different tribes, in order that you may get to know each other, not despise one another. And I love the way this concludes in the Quran. It says, God revealed to Prophet Muhammad, verily, anyway, the most honorable, noble, dignified among you are those who are closest to God. Your skin color doesn't bring you close to God. Your circumstances, maybe if you're right in heart, will probably bring you close to God, but definitely not your hair texture, and not how much money you have or don't have. It's your heart. It's the obedience to God that brings you close to God. So in God's view, the most dignified, the most honorable are those of us who are obedient.
And the Imam's point about, babies crying and, there's no separate language is so true. It also is important that I think there's a lot that needs to be unlearned that has been taught improperly, and then there's a new learning opportunity. There's a great song from the movie South Pacific that says, you've got to be carefully taught to hate.
Yeah.
No child comes into the world differentiating. That's got to be taught. So we have to be committed to unlearn those things that have led some of us down the wrong path of what we perceive to be understanding our history. And then we have to be committed to learning, to sharing, to giving our children the opportunity to know the fullness of everyone, to honor and respect everyone, right? And the one common thing that connects us all, because I've been all over the world and I've never seen two people, and I've been in some really contentious situations in the world, where two people were so angry at each other until they refused to breathe each other's air. The one common connector that connects us to life, the one unifier, is the breath of life itself. All breath common in, all breath common out. And these appear like metaphors, but when you turn your mind around and take a look at it, why are we arguing? Why are we divided? It's largely about fear. And oftentimes, it's the fear of some story that you've told or that you've been told. And you live into the fear of that. Most of what our communities of privilege, or our white community, a great deal of what people are fearful of is of a system that they created. The stronger, the bigger, the darker, the mightier I was as an individual, the more money I was worth when I was on the slave block. Now my power, my strength, who I am, some people are afraid of. We have got to unlearn the things that have served to make us think one's more privileged than the other, and we've got to be committed to sharing the truth and teaching our children that there is a greater way. And that's got to be the most important thing for humanity.
Just a brief observation to piggyback. We hate what we fear. We hate what we fear. Don't believe me? You say you're afraid of spiders? You hate a spider.
Snakes, that's my
You're afraid of snakes. You hate a snake. We hate what we fear. And scripture says perfect love casts out fear. And I just wanted to put
They
that
always
out.
say love is the answer, right? And goodness knows that's been in song for millennia.
So Fred, you've given me a new appreciation of the NFL.
Okay.
Big and strong, right? So when I dig back, I mean, this is such a wonderful conversation, and I'm telling you, we could go on all night and into the next day, just the four of us. The fear of economic loss by the Prince of Portugal got him hooked on the idea that he could buy Africans and sell them as slaves in the New World. And he went to the Pope, and he asked the Pope to give him a special dispensation so that he could then go to unknown lands to make profit. We call that the doctrine of discovery. It was started as an economic enterprise, and it intentionally subhumanized Africans for gain. And then after that economic relationship was set up between the church and the state, between religion and authority, right? Then we found numerous ways to justify why we did it. There was no discovery. Let's be clear. First of all, there was no discovery. There were up to 100 million people here on the North American continent when the Spaniards showed up in St. Petersburg over a sacred ground. To call it the doctrine of discovery is to deny the people who are already here. Our Constitution would not exist without those people. We, when I say we now, I'm speaking about Euros, we didn't have the political concepts in Europe that are in the Constitution of the United States of America. We were not able to import those ideas over here. The basic concept of checks and balances did not come from Europe. It didn't come from Thomas Jefferson or David Hume or John Locke. They came from the Iroquois nation, who had a checks and balances kind of society. In fact, they had a council of women, and the tribes couldn't go to war unless the mothers and grandmothers said, our children and grandchildren require this sacrifice for the 7th generation, right? We could use a council of grandmothers now in this country. Maybe the U.S. Senate, for instance. And so we have a lot to learn that we have ignored, buried under the ground, forgotten about. Jesus said, the eye is a camera. It projects what's in the heart. Right? And so we see what we expect to see. We see what we fear. We see what we don't like, as well as we see what we love. And so as we've had this profound conversation about how much of the world we need to fear, but also how much more of the world we need to fear. And the problem with making economic gain the focus of one's life is that it alienates you from everyone else around you. And so we created a constitution of alienation. Let me tell you how severe it is. The legal code of the state of Florida says that we must teach in the 6th grade the Declaration of Independence to our children, including the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and property. And property. That's what it says. And if you have ever sat and listened to our governor, he likes to talk about the right to property. I think you have that declaration there, whatever. That's not what it says, right?
Yeah.
It says the pursuit of happiness, right? And so how do we pursue happiness? I cannot do that from economic gain. Right? No matter how much money I have, it doesn't necessarily mean my grandchildren will love me. And happiness, it won't come from the gold I have. But I can show you some pictures of my granddaughter. Right? Right?
And Papa's Pizza.
And so I've got to learn to see every child as my grandchild. And every adult as my brother or sister. I have to begin to see one another for their value of being, not for how much money they can make me in the world. And I think what we're struggling with right now, and what COVID has really shown, perhaps more than anything else, is that we don't need to spend our lives making money. We need to spend our lives making relationships. The money will come.
The safety, the security will come.
The safety, the security, it'll all come.
And the fear will dissipate.
The fear, perfect love. Cast out all fear.
I think we have to really recognize too that a lot of people are hungry.
Yes.
A lot of people have been hungry for a very, very long
Yes.
time. A lot of people are homeless.
Yes.
A lot of people have come from a history of several generations of poverty and not a full sense of self. And that, again, is a byproduct of the legacy of discrimination. So I do believe that there has to be sort of a parallel track, three parallel tracks. One is we have to really see ourselves and engage in new conversations and new understandings of our humanity. We have to see each other as equal. We have to recognize and see each other as equal. We have to acknowledge and be committed to work on those systemic changes and those things that we as a community need to do so that people have shelter and so that people have food, so that people have hope. And then third, there has to be systemic change. You know, I'm doing some work in the work that I do, both at SPIFS and with the Stress Center, with Johns Hopkins, their Institute for Art and Mind. And I really want to talk to you about that, Doctor, because in terms of health equity, there's a real powerful body of work that's being studied now about how important it is for a person to feel that their story is heard and felt. You know, when I travel around the world, you go to communities in the world, you look into the eyes of children, you know, and if their eyes are still and kind of cloudy, you know, and they don't allow themselves, or their circumstances don't allow them to be in the dream space, or if someone doesn't feel like what they have to say is heard and is not important, it has a tremendous impact upon their health and well-being. you know, the opportunity to feel like you're vitally received and that you have vital opportunities is a health issue. And so, you know,
Mental, spiritual, physical.
yeah,
all of it.
the full spectrum, and that's an important part of our everyday lives. I need to be able to hear your story. I need to be able to hear, know, and feel you, and you need to know that I'm hearing you and that you matter. That's a really important thing. While at the same time, we have to do everything that we can to feed, house, and clothe. And this is a broader problem now because of the amplification of COVID-19 and so many people that are struggling now because they don't have a means by which to make a living. So that any one of our problems is all of our problems. We have to move beyond thinking, well, I'm cool. No, you're not. Maybe for the moment.
I don't think anybody's really cool anymore. I think we're all feeling the pressure in one way or another, and I think that's become kind of a great equalizer. You know, that silver lining to this dark shadow that we've all been under for the last 5 months, and looking for the next steps. Now that I'm off the gerbil wheel again, and I can see differently, and I can hear differently, and I'm starting to get a little more curious because I'm kind of tired of all the stuff I see all the time that isn't really what I wanted to see anyway, and I'm running out of things to watch on television. Maybe I can start living into my heart space and into my curiosity instead of my fear. Because curiosity is when you start solving problems. Curiosity is when you start reconnecting with your neighbor that you've lived next to for 5 years, and other than waving them in the driveway, you don't know who they are.
Yeah.
You know, I'm amazed at how little we even know our neighbors anymore.
Yeah.
From the way we even grew up one generation ago.
Absolutely.
It's palpable.
So COVID has revealed a lot of the sickness in the human heart that's been ever present in the world, and various peoples have felt the impact of it more heavily than others. And so, you know, the scripture, the Bible, the Christian scriptures talk about an apocalypse, and a lot of people think like, you know, stars falling out of the sky, but the word means revealing. That's what the word means. And COVID is having this dramatic global revealing right now of the injustice, of the inequity, of the wrong, of the unrighteousness, of the political division making that has actually been at the heart of this society for a very long time. And as we move demographically into a space in which no one people have a majority share of the population, we're faced with a challenge that's new in human history. That we will make a more perfect union out of the diversities of peoples, as the Quran talks about it, rather than out of some kind of majoritarian monoculture. And so to be able to learn our neighbor without feeling that what our neighbor has to share with us somehow forces us to be like that person is vitally important. And so we've got to love. And by that I mean profound mutual respect, that you get to be you and I get to be me, right?
I think we also, I love what you're saying, Reverend Myers, and also kind of piggybacking on what Fred shared with us. We have to start having courageous conversations. Courageous in that we can move beyond just the superficiality of what needs to be discussed. Courageous conversations about the things that divide us. Race, religion, income, gender. We have to be able to hear another person's perspective in a non-judgmental way.
Without feeling threatened.
Without feeling threatened, and we have to be able to honor that right to speak the truth as that person knows it. That's hard. Some things are difficult to listen to. It's difficult to hear. You have to find another way of hearing. When you find it difficult, rather than shutting the conversation down, ask yourself, is there another way of hearing this? We must agree that we want to reach a place of agreement. So not entering a conversation to see how we can destroy each other's truth. And that takes a lot. That takes courage. That's why we call it courageous conversations. We have grown up and been told not to talk about politics, not to talk about religion. We don't talk about sex and mixed audiences. We don't talk about gender preferences and all those things are taboo, but we have to start having these courageous conversations.
And we have to, I want to go back to something Dr. Meyer said, and picked up on what Fred was talking about, but you mentioned property and how the underlying foundation of this whole system in the United States was based on property. But there was a property, I'm sure you know, we're speaking in the ordinance now. Human beings were also property.
Exactly.
And I want to quote something right quick from Benjamin Waterhouse, The Land of Enterprise, the business history of the United States of America. And this, we have to have the courage to acknowledge these things. He says, quote, on average, slaves were worth $200 each in the early 19th century. Some were worth far more. Solomon Northup recounted a negotiation over an attractive young girl for whom a white man offered $5,000. By the eve of the Civil War, historians estimate that the total cash value of the 4 million slaves in the American South was $3.5 billion in 1860 money. At more than 80% of the country's total economic output, this nation was built on slavery. That figure today, newsflash, ready for this, would be roughly $13.8 trillion today. Understood in that way, enslaved people were capital assets worth more than the country's entire productive capacity from manufacturing, trade, and railroads combined. In short, African slaves built America.
The conversation about reparations is historically mandatory and desperately needed. Fred spoke about the long history of poverty and suffering. And so as the imam was reading those numbers, what you need to see is white men taking the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches out of the mouths of black babies. That's what those numbers are. And not just for one day, but for 400 years, right? And so when we look around this nation, just about anything, any structure of size that we see, especially if it was built before 1960, it was built on the back of unpaid black labor. And Scripture calls that theft and says, if you have defrauded somebody, here's a big number for you. The Zacchaeus story. You pay them back 4 times what you defrauded them. And if this were truly a Christian nation, and it just followed what the book says, I'd be asking you for a loan, Fred.
So,
And they talk about a courageous conversation, right?
Yeah.
Members of Congress have died for 50 years introducing the bill to have the conversation in Congress died before Congress has had the conversation, right? And so this is a needed conversation. It's needed by all of us. I'm going to say this as a person of European descent. Pale people like me need to have this conversation because the moral injury that we have caused to others has also injured our soul. Right? You cannot take bread out of a baby's mouth without dehumanizing yourself. That's the story that we have to begin to explore.
There's so much listening and sharing that needs to go on so many different levels. So part of that has been allowed to happen here because we've been able to have a truly meaningful conversation about challenging topics, about history, about pain, about fear, and about what's next. So when we leave this place of comfort and great conversation, the roads will take us in all different directions going home. So now where do we go from here in the healing of our communities? What are our next steps? What can we do to move this ball forward in a way that we all want to go together?
Yeah, I think that, and by the way, Dr. Meyer and those of you all who are viewing, I didn't read that from that book for you to feel guilty about it, not that you are, because you're not responsible for that. That happened behind us. But it has to be acknowledged that, which is what you're doing and what we're doing here. So I don't see myself, so I understand my history and cultural background, I don't see myself as a victim. I'm not a victim. But the history of the United States of America, as my brother Fred said, we have to unlearn some things. And in the process, Dr. Carter G. Woodson wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Negro, which he wasn't talking about Euro-Americans. While we're trying to get other people to understand us, we need to understand ourselves. We need to relearn and rethink some things ourselves. That's another conversation in the house with us. So in America, the reason we have such a problem is, unlike Dr. Meyer and Jenny and others, they don't even acknowledge that we contributed to the development of this nation. And I remember in Jacksonville, Florida, one time I was having a demonstration, or it was a peaceful protest, and one European American lady, she said to me, she said, "You need to go back to Africa. Go back home." And I said, well, if you hadn't brought my ancestors here, you wouldn't be having this conversation with me, because first of all, we're the only people outside of the Iroquois and the Shawnee and others and the Native Americans that didn't choose to come to the United States of America. We were brought in through that door of no return on Glory Island. So the African Americans, the indigenous Native Americans are the only two groups of people that did not volunteer to come to the United States of America. Now, I'm happy to be here. This is my country. I don't have any other nation. I love the United States of America, working to help change it. But there has to be an acknowledgement. Here's where we find ourselves in COVID America, COVID world, global order. Now, let us respect each other. Let us correct the misinformation and miseducation without finger pointing blame, because you're not responsible for any of this. Though you indirectly benefit from it, you're not responsible for it. So there has to be that acknowledgement that some things behind us, America's original sin, we hear this all the time, was that 401 years of slavery in America. And until we acknowledge that and correct that, you're going to always have these structural inequities, economic injustice, social injustice, racism and racial superiority, and all of these things. But we are starting that, having an honest conversation, the courage to have open dialogue. This should happen across the United States of America. And by the way, we're on Facebook Live. So this conversation is going across America. What we encourage everyone else to do in your local communities, get together with like-minded people and have these open, honest discussions, and we can agree to disagree without being disagreeable.
Speaking of which, we're already starting to get some questions from not only, the audience, but Facebook and whatnot. And interestingly enough, I just had one from Jan Magray about Reverend Russell. My grandfather was an immigrant from Sweden, and he came into this country with a degree in engineering from his Swedish origins. But he made little money here in Upper Peninsula, Michigan, in the mines. And he and his wife and 7 children lived in a one-room cabin. I've seen it. And nobody was rich. What about these people? Not all Europeans were rich or in control.
Can I answer that, Mayor?
Sure. I'll respond up to you.
Yeah, this happens a lot, and it's kind of like why there is a challenge. A lot of people are challenged by the concept of Black Lives Matter. I think what it is important for America to be willing to do. America, please allow Black Americans to speak their truth, to cry, to articulate their hurt, to articulate their desires. This is the thing. Absolutely no one implies that there were not lots and lots of poor white folk. The truth of the reality that exists is when I walk through the door, I have no camouflage. My ancestors were brought here as slaves. Her grandfather, her aunt came here of his own free will. This is not about being rich or poor. This is about being dehumanized. This is about a whole race of people who were made to be someone else's property. None of this conversation minimizes at all the reality of her relatives. Our relatives died, were hung, were murdered, were made to work. This is the truth. It's not an effort to disavow or to make less of. But please, there has to become a time in America where the reality of the descendants of slaves is not minimized. Allow Black America to speak its truth and let that truth be felt. No blame, but allow it to be felt. You just want to be understood and felt as real human beings. Not have to run faster, not have to jump higher, not have to hear. Listen, Black Americans live our whole lives with that preface, in spite of. Just allow us to erase the in spite of. To those folk who have a challenge with the concept of hearing Black Lives Matter. That's not to say that other lives don't matter. That's to say, hey, I matter. This is not about you. I matter. We matter. We're alive. We're here. We're full. We're vital. Like you. We breathe. It's not to diminish you. It's to say, hey, see me. Honor me. It's not about, yeah, but. It's not about, yeah, but. It's about just receive the reality. It's not, we're not attempting to ask somebody to, no. But when you have to, like if a child is whimpering and nobody listens, a child will eventually cry out and a child will scream. Ask my granddaughter. Just want to be seen and felt and recognized and understood. That's the impact of dehumanization. I'm sorry, I just had to.
No, I'm glad you said it, because though I know that, I cannot speak it for myself. So it was necessary to be said. My family, half of my family were peasant Dutch who settled in Upper New York in the early 1700s, escaping war and famine. The other half of my family were German, escaping war and famine in the late 1800s and settled in the prairies. I come from Nebraska. Nebraska is a gift of Abraham Lincoln, who decimated the native peoples. I grew up on the land of the Ponca, a tribe of the Sioux, and in one season they killed the buffalo. And then Abraham Lincoln carved up what's now Nebraska into homestead and gave it to Europeans, right? And the state of Nebraska has been cardinal red ever since Abraham Lincoln took the land from the natives and gave it to those peasant Europeans who cut up the sod, destroyed the prairie, and now we have significant climate change happening in that area. We have to understand the way all of these things have impacted all of us. And my story does not erase Fred's story, and Fred's story does not erase my story. But those two stories, when they begin to come together, can show us the pathway to a more perfect union. So we need to hear the stories.
What a beautiful segue. We're literally running a little bit out of time. And so what I would like to do is have each of you, really quick, give us a nugget of inspiration, of action, of something we can do to take forward tonight for our audience to hold on to that says, wow, we do have common humanity. There is new, wonderful things coming for all of us. This is a great opportunity. The time is now. Let's move forward together. How can we do that?
Yes, very quick, very briefly. Be kind. Be kind. Practice kindness. And as action, try to practice some act of kindness daily or weekly.
Perfect.
Very good. I am reminded of one another scriptures. One another scriptures, and there are over 100. So things like love one another, be devoted to one another, honor one another, live in harmony with one another, build up one another, be like-minded towards one another. Look them up. Google is a miracle. It can teach you a lot about how we are to treat each other.
The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
I think, two really important things. Be curious, be willing to learn, be willing to be unafraid and learn. And I think it's really important for us to focus less on what we do and focus more on who we choose to be. Who do we choose to be with each other? How do we choose to be with each other in the world? And then our doing will be immense.
I want to say that you should find somebody most unlike yourself and become their friend. Whatever you have to do to become their friend. That's moral and ethical and the rest. But learn the cost of friendship, because the price of division is destroying us all.
Perfect. Very perfect. All right, what I want to do now is introduce someone to close us out for the evening. So without further ado, I pass it off to Imam Abdul Karim Ali from the interpreting.
Thank you so much. I'd like to begin my closing remarks of saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. With Allah's God, name number merciful benefactor, merciful redeemer. But I'd like to say also to our Honorable Mayor Rick Kreisman and his administration, Chief Anthony Holloway, and those who support him, think about a lot of other things that have been said, and certainly we need to work on bettering our police department. But we're having this conversation where? In the police department. So we thank them for giving their support. We like to say to our honorable viewers who have tuned in to listen to this historical conversation, thank you so much for tuning in to hear this wonderful presentation that have been given here tonight. And if you'd like to support ongoing effort, there's information on your screen that you can support this effort. Please, by all means, please support us for the continuation of helping bringing humanity back together. For we all can agree that humanity has been disconnected, and in our effort to work to bring humanity back together with your support. Lastly, we'd like to just invite you to another upcoming event that we are having. This body is sponsoring in April 2021. It's our annual Iftar dinner, where in the month of Ramadan, we invite the community as a whole to come together so that we can sit down to honor one another, to break bread and fellowship, and be recognized that we are one human family. We will have some additional information that will be shared with you. We'd like to close by saying, Shalom, Assalamu alaikum. God peace be with you. Thank you so much.
Wow, nice musical out.
Wow. No, I just want to thank you all once again for your time, for your wisdom. As Katura said at one point, we dropped some knowledge on everyone today, and thank you again for your insights and inspiration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, enjoy it.
Wow. Guys, fantastic. Thank you all so much. You guys made my job so easy because you just rocked it.
Awesome,
Beautiful job.
awesome.
Beautiful job.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go, because, said he couldn't make it. Said he couldn't make it because he was in the Oh. You should be able
Look, 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 look. I don't see anybody's teeth. Aren't you
I'm
smiling?
I'm smiling.
I'm really smiling.
Our eyes are smiling. Whereas at the soul. Very good, you guys. Thank you so much. Woo! Bravo!
Oh, yeah.